I'm John Graham, and I've lectured in biology for a number of years, and I'm also a Christian, member of the Church of England. I have a BSc in zoology, as it happens. Originally, I'm Jamaican, West Indian. My BSc is from the University of the West Indies in Jamaica. I have a PhD in marine biology from the University of Wales. I have a couple of postdocs in various aspects of always working on marine animals. And then, since the end of the second postdoc, I've been working as a lecturer at Leeds University. From the point of view of what I understand the ID arguments to be, no, I don't think they are particularly intelligently designed. One example would be our eyes, where the retina is back to front. You wouldn't design a camera that way. You wouldn't put the sensitive elements of either film or a sensor in a modern digital camera. You would put them behind a mesh of blood vessels, which is what has happened in our eyes. Squid's eyes are far more intelligently designed than ours. So there are intelligently designed eyes. They just don't happen to be the way that the vertebrate eye is built. I've had an injury recently, a self-inflicted injury, trying to open a cupboard door and gripping the handle too hard. The little finger had nothing to grip on, and it curled up too much. My own muscles snapped the tendon. I exceeded the design limitations, if you like, of the tendon. Now, was that tendon intelligently designed or not? You could argue that it's an intelligent design, that I failed. The finger failed because I exceeded its design limitations. You could argue that you ought to foresee that a human being would want to do fiddly little hard grips, and the little finger ought to be a bit stronger in case it doesn't have anything to grip onto. There is another story, and I'm not enough of an anatomist to comment too much on this, but in discussing the tendon problem with an authority on vertebrate anatomy and vertebrate biomechanics, it was pointed out to me that we actually have a tendon running down the hand which bifurcates, one branch going down the little finger and one branch going down the fourth finger, is it? And that's partly why we have such difficulty in moving these fingers independently. They're not independent. Now in chimpanzees there's a great deal more independence here, because there are, I think, two tendons rather than one bifurcating. Chimpanzees ought to be better pianists than we are, my informant tells me, on those grounds, because they have hands which are better designed for playing the piano. Snails, by which I would mean marine snails rather than land snails, and among marine snails, intertidal snails. The attraction of the intertidal is that it's accessible, and it's a very compressed gradient between land and sea. And the animals that I'm working on, common periwinkles, show signs of adapting to this environmental gradient in the particular way of actually splitting themselves into two different forms, sometimes called morphs, sometimes called ecotypes, between which there is something of what's called a reproductive barrier. In other words, the animals don't hybridize with complete success. And this does indeed seem to be a case of speciation going on now in real time. Real time, of course, is going to take many thousands of years, or even longer. Who will be around to see the end of the process, and indeed which direction is the process going in? We don't know. We don't know whether this is resorption of forms that had evolved separately and have come together, or whether it is the pulling apart of a population. Probably the latter, we're probably seeing speciation. That's the interest in snails. There is the question of what you mean by kind, because in any population at any time there may be selection, there may be evolutionary change. The descendants may not be quite like the immediate ancestors because of a selection pressure. There are some very good examples of that that we understand quite a lot about now. But that's not necessarily speciation, that's a change within a population. Speciation is perhaps harder to understand, and yes, the stuff that I've been working on, and it has to be said, there are lots of other examples happening with sticklebacks, for example, or the cichlid fish of the major African lakes, to name two, among fruit flies in northeastern North America. There are other examples of organisms, if you like, splitting up the habitat between them and adapting themselves to particular bits of the habitat and then acquiring these reproductive barriers between the populations. And this is a process of speciation driven by ecology and evolution. No, they haven't evolved into something else. I suppose it's hierarchical, or it's Russian dolls. These changes are nested inside one another. The sticklebacks have not evolved into something else. They've not evolved into land animals. As it happens, we have pretty good evidence of where and how even some fish-like animals did evolve into terrestrial walking beasts, which are no doubt the ancestors of the amphibians, the ancestors of the reptiles, the birds, the mammals. You have to be around for an awfully long time to see this happening, so we haven't seen it happening. But the evidence is all consistent with this story, that this is how it happened. And I'll be born again. Most certainly. I think there's lots of evidence that human beings have evolved from apes. We are probably, as one biologist has put it, the third chimpanzee. And personally, I don't have a lot of trouble with that conclusion. I think we did evolve from apes. I think we are biologically apes. Really quite a good skeletal fossil series leading from us back into ape stock. Lots of commonality in biochemistry, lots of commonality in genes and in the way the genes are arranged on very, very similar chromosomes between, for example, ourselves, the chimpanzees, and the gorillas. I probably want to eat my cake and have it and say both things may be true. Why does one exclude the other? I recognize that that's not necessarily going to satisfy some people. Another answer to the same sort of question and to criticisms that come up here is that I don't think you can prove history. I don't think you can prove what happened. even 100 years ago, let alone 100,000 years ago. You have very good evidence for what happened 100 years ago because you have documentary evidence, documentary records. We haven't got that for suggestions, for example, that we are apes, that we are descended from a common ancestor with the chimpanzees. But the evidence that we do have, as I say, from skeletons, fossils, from our DNA, our chromosomes and our biochemistry, the evidence is all consistent with, and I would use that phrase, it's all consistent with this supposition. It doesn't prove it, it can't prove it. You can't do a scientific experiment which proves that story, but you can do science which says, here we have a whole body of evidence consistent with that analysis. Very interesting question. I said a few minutes ago that I forget exactly of what question, but I said both things can be true. And I haven't thought, if you like, I haven't thought the God side of it through nearly enough. If God is an infinitely wise designer and an all-seeing designer, He can set the processes going. He can set the ball rolling down the hill and know where it's going to end up. Children can do that with marbles in a gutter. Another answer here, another thought here, is that I think it's extremely difficult, if not impossible, to prove the existence of God. I think it's just as impossible to prove the non-existence of God.
My self-conceited mask, it hides away
the Earth, I think, is probably about 4.3, 4.4 billion years old. Once again, this is not something that you can prove in the sense that you can prove what happened last week. Yes, I think there is evidence for that. Again, you appeal to what would have to be true in terms of the state of the Earth now, if it was formed in the way that we suppose it was formed, and I'm sorry I'm very hazy on those details, but if it was formed in that way about 4.5 billion years ago. I think that has to be a metaphor. It has to be, do you want to say a metaphor, an allegory? It has to be a story which is told to explain what we still find really pretty inexplicable. In other words, I don't take Genesis to be literally true.
You always take it out on, you always take it out on me.
Make you a rose.